Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Leanpub Podcast, I'll be interviewing Alex Telford. Based in Paraparaumu, New Zealand, Alex is a senior pipeline and software engineer who's been working in the VFX and games production world for a little over 12 years. Prior to that, he worked as an artist doing graphic design, websites, and short commercials. You can follow him on LinkedIn at Mr. Minimal Effort, which is easy to find. Alex is the author of the book Practical Python for Production Under Pressure, Managing the Insanity that is Developing Pipelines Alongside a Production at Full Speed. In the book, Alex focuses on practical workflows and theory to build practical tools and pipelines within an ever-changing environment using Python, PySide, and Ingenuity, and maybe a little duct tape. In this interview, we're going to talk about Alex's background and career, and we're going to talk about his book and what it's about, and then we'll talk a little bit about his experience becoming an author. So thank you very much, Alex, for taking some time out of your day to talk to me and to talk to all of us.
Thank you for having me.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way into the career that you've built for yourself.
So I grew up in New Zealand in Palms of the North, and I originally wanted to be get into design. I've always loved design, and worked my way through doing web design and graphic design, and then eventually decided I wanted to be an animator on feature films. Went to animation school, so discovered I'm horrible at animating, and actually got my first shortly after deciding that, got my first job offer at Weta Digital as a TD in the animation department. So TD is it's a technical director, which is short form for sort of like developers that help artists with daily activities. From there, I spent over a decade at Weta, working my way through there. I worked in the animation department. Predominantly, a lot of that time was in the motion realm. So motion is previs, animation, layout, and lighting, camera, that sort of thing. From there, moved over to software engineering. So that's working on a lot more back-end infrastructure. I never quite intended to end up in the field. It was just sort of fell from one role to another.
I know, fantastic. That's great for sharing that. And so when we're talking animation school, what kind of animation are we talking about here? Are we talking about cartoons, kind of giant CGI dragons?
So it's a bit of a mix, but that at animation school, that was in 3D animation. So that was at it was a company called UB in Wellington. I think it was it was Netcol. They renamed themselves to UB, and I did a 1-year diploma there, and that was doing 3D animation for film, more so than games, and yeah.
Yeah, I think people might be curious. I mean, I certainly am, to know about what's it like? Are you sat down with I need something like this, and you just get a description of it? Are you given like a storyboard with sketches, or is it sometimes more specific? Like, I want the water to look more like water.
I mean, I can't comment too much on what the actual animators do in the jobs, because I never quite made it that far.
Oh, right.
I did the school aspect, but I was never quite good enough to be a actual artist in the field. But they do get a range of notes. So the notes that an artist will get, yes, they may get something like, hey, animate a character walking across here. They may get something where, hey, here's an existing shot, I need you to add more weight. They need to, it really depends on the skill of the artist and then the director that's involved. So artists, particularly in industry, so at companies like Weta Digital, highly skilled, and they can take like a gist of information and turn it into something beautiful. But some people also give them more detail. So it varies.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I guess one thing I'm curious about. So the whole framing of the book is about pressure, and you talk about sort of being real time, kind of like being on a pit crew. And it's funny, I actually, another Leanpub author like you, who I interviewed a couple of years ago, he actually worked on the Ferrari F1 racing team on the programming side. back in the like mid-aughts or something like that. So I think I have a little bit of a sense just from talking to him vicariously of the kind of pressure that you're under. And I guess I'm curious, is like, so we all of us who sort of consume movies and TV shows and commercials and what have you know that technology is changing all the time. Does it change while you're working on a project?
Absolutely. Sometimes we'll be put onto a completely different framework halfway through. It What I liken it to is there's two different primary ways that people develop software. You've got the traditional software development. That's what we did at Unity, things like that, where it's very structured. There's a process that you go through for every change, and everything takes forever. But by the end of it, you've got highly battle-tested code that will work for everyone. So you only get a few bugs at the end. For visual effects productions and to an extent games as well, it's less about the code, it's more about delivering the project. So the code is there to make sure that that movie gets across the line by hook or by crook. You've got to just get it there. So ideally, yes, we love to write code that is highly structured and well maintained and tested and all the rest of it. But often there's not time. Sometimes we'll sit in an artist. I've had times when I've sat at an artist's desk and created software at their desk. They've used it, and then we completely forget it exists. So for things like that, there's no point doing the whole process. So that's why I liken it to being in a pit crew, because you've just got to think on your feet at times, particularly when you're working on what I call the front lines, which is directly with the artist in the heat of a project that is already 3 months behind deadline, getting it through.
And what would a bottleneck to getting it through be that might occur? A bug in a code, things aren't working fast, things aren't rendering fast enough, for example?
Many things. So it could be that that there's just they have a specific type of movement that needs to happen, and they need to. So one example, which I believe I included in the book, was when there was once an artist who had to create an animation on like a steel drum sort of thing, and they had to create that across about 30 of them, and they were to be slightly different, slightly offset in time as they sort of waved around. So that was an example where it would take them a while to copy the animation across, tweak it, and then as they tweak the animation, they have to copy it over again and tweak it again. So what I did is, in that instance, I sat down with them. I wrote probably about 10 lines of code that would take the animation, copy it across all of them, offset it by some random value, and away they go. And it's not enough to get the project delivered, but it's enough for them to get like 80% of the way so they can finish off. And in that instance, his deadline was that day, so he had to get it done. Yeah. Sometimes it's like that. There are, of course, a lot of other pressures. There are times when there are bugs. So someone's got a big delivery and the system is broken because a lot of our code is very brittle because of the nature of the way we work, unfortunately. And sometimes we have to go in and actually just edit some of the variables on the computer just to nudge the system so that it can actually get through the process. We'll take a note of it, go back to our desk, fix it properly. But getting the artist moving, that's crucial. You've got to make sure that those artists aren't just sitting around waiting for you.
And is this the kind of work where it's like 2 a.m. you get a phone call, or you get like an alert, and you've got to go into the office kind of thing, or is it like
No,
100-hour weeks when you're on deadline?
The longest week I've worked was 93.
Okay,
I've worked with artists that were a lot longer, a lot more hours than that. Fortunately, the companies really try to not have people working those long hours because it's counterproductive. People make mistakes, and it's just a mess. Sometimes it's the nature of the game. That's what happens. But yeah, these things happen throughout the day constantly. So we try and make things as stable as possible. But there's always these little things, and it's taking a look at these tasks as they come in and saying, hey, an artist has this issue, and this is one of the things we talk about in the book. But an artist comes to you with an issue, and they go, hey, I really need this done now. Like my deadline's today or tomorrow, I have to do this. And it's now sitting down with them going, okay, if you don't have this, what happens? Like, and they'll go, oh, I'll use this thing, but it sucks. Cool, go use that thing.
Right.
Make a ticket. We'll do it properly later. But
Mhm.
like, the day before your deadline's not the time to have those discussions of creating new software, because we've got 50 other things to do. Sometimes it'll be a case of there's no way, like, my job's on the line here because we have to get this done. I don't know how to do it. My supervisor doesn't know how to do it. And we look at that and we go, you know what? That's about 50 lines of code. Let's just bung that in. These are, of course, all the very tip of the frontline tasks. These are you're not doing those constantly throughout the day. These are just the ones that you stick in your mind because you're like, it's the worst code you write. But they get the artist moving.
Yeah, your book is very practical about that. About there's a line I think from the book description: everything is always urgent, everything is always broken, and we developers are left scrambling to hold the system together while begging production for time to do things properly and clean up accumulated code debt. And I think we just got a very practical example or two of how that code debt accumulates. I mean, it's not there because of laziness. It's not there because of inattention or something like that. It's there because of as you said, the nature of the work.
There's the production pressures. There's also the aspect of sometimes we do get caught up in this mindset of we don't have time. Everything's always high pressure. And to take the other part of that is you do have to take a step back and you go, are we under pressure right now? Because if you're always running, if sometimes you don't have to run. Like sometimes you can take a step back and go, you know what? Actually, production is not on our back about things. No one's pressuring us. People are in heightened, like everyone around us is in that heightened state of urgency because we've been heightened urgency for the past 2 weeks. Things are backing off a bit, but sometimes you carry that through, and you do often need to take a step back and go, you know what, we're actually not under the pump right now. We are still doing overtime. We're still under pressure, not so much pressure. We're not cracking.
One thing I've talked to, because so many Leanpub books are kind of programming or programming adjacent kind of technical books, many of the people I've spoken to on the podcast are programmers, but very few are from the kind that I've spoken to or from the industry that you're in. And one thing that seems to be quite common across many industries is that in the relationship between basically management and programmer is often treated like a black box that's just issued get it done style commands, and they don't want to hear anything else. I mean, just to start with that, that's what I've heard from lots of other industries. How would you characterize typically, not necessarily where you've worked, but from people you've talked to, I'm sure, typically in like the animation and film and production. I mean, and I guess let's throw gaming in there too. While I'm asking you to make huge generalizations, what's the what's the relationship like?
Yeah. So there is a degree of that. However, particularly in my experience from working in film, is there is a lot of very smart technical people that you often don't think are technically smart. There are, of course, the artists that so I mean, a lot of artists are brilliant and technical. Some of them are they're brilliant and they don't care about the technical side, and they're happy to treat you as a black box because that's not their focus, which is fine. As far as management goes, a lot of managers I've worked with, particularly in my career, have been very technically competent and able to understand those issues and understand the timeframes. And I think that's really crucial in these industries, is to have someone have these managers and managers of managers that understand what's involved in the process, so that when they get these reports, they know what to do with them, rather than just having someone go, oh, I don't really know what any of this means, so I'm going to put a number on it. And I have worked with, not at these companies, but I have worked with people like that in the past, and it never ends well. People end up just inflating all the numbers because
Yeah, no, I've heard versions of that story before. I mean, particularly often, people can come from a management school background where they want numbers, and they think that if they've got numbers, that's proof that something discrete and measurable has taken place. Otherwise, why would I have numbers? And it's like, the reason you got numbers is because you asked for numbers. not because that necessarily reflects some kind of underlying strict one-to-one reality correspondence going on.
Yeah. I mean, people are always wanting to put numbers on things for time management. And there's, I mean, you've probably heard of story points that have been a thing for a while. And people will go, "Oh, what do those mean?" Because developers don't want to talk in terms of point system, because it doesn't mean, like, you'll end up with weeks where one person's doing 3 points worth of work and another person has done 80. And you're like, well, has that person done a lot more work? No, the points were just wrong. Or because the minimum number of points was 1, that person has just done a crap load of really little tasks. And I've been in that situation before where my numbers were really high, and wasn't because I was doing any more work. It was just I was picking up all the low-hanging fruit because I was new to the team. I was still working out my way around the code base, and in order to do that, often we'd start with all the little bits, and I was just knocking them out. And it doesn't make people feel good when they do that. So yeah, it's a balancing act that no one's really figured out yet.
Definitely. Just moving on to talk about your book, Practical Python for Production Under Pressure. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origin story of the book. I mean, who's it for, and when did the idea first come to you? You know what? I'm going to try writing a book.
Yeah, I did not plan on writing a book. I started by writing a article on, it was just based on a few conversations I was having at the time. This was around October, I think. I was like, yeah, I'm going to write an article about time management and working with working on the front lines, essentially, in code, because it's not an aspect that's often talked about. It's people like to pretend that good engineers are always doing test-driven development. We're always doing very well-structured code, and we're following all the design principles of code and all that. But people don't really want to take a step back and say, hey, sometimes we don't follow those rules, and sometimes we do deliver crappy code because it's needed. So I wanted to like take it from the other angle, and it just sort of snowballed a bit. I kept writing, and then at some point I think I realized it was a book when I got to around 60 pages. I was like, okay, I'm now making like a little short PDF I can send out. I sent it to a few colleagues, and they came back with suggestions on additional content. I was like, yeah, cool. I can add a section on Qt and user experience. Like, no worries, we can do that. We can look into debugging. Some people really wanted to know more about debugging and performance management of code. I was like, cool, we can do that. At some point, it became over 300 pages. I think 366 is where I got to before I put it on Leanpub. And then when I put it on Leanpub, it turned into 500 because I was using quite a small font size. Yeah.
That's funny. Normally people wouldn't expect it to get fatter when you put it on something called Lean, but there you go. That's really good. And what were you? Is the book for like beginners? So, for example, like let's say I've got some kind of role and I've been told to use Python. Is this the kind of book I should go to?
I would say it's for it's starting at beginner, but I'd say if you'd need some experience in Python and PySide for following through the book. So it's really aimed at TDs and technical artists. There is a number of chapters in there aimed at more advanced. You don't need to be advanced to understand it, but they're more advanced topics, particularly around data models inside of Qt. But yeah, it's sort of an beginner to intermediate level for the book. I would say it's probably not best for your first Python book. It is, we don't cover all the basic principles. And also, because I am tackling this book from almost an anti-pattern perspective, I'm trying to be against the grain. Like these are almost the dark side of writing Python. And I want people to read that and be able to take a step back while they're reading it and challenge those thoughts as they go. So not just go, oh, this is the correct way to do it all the time, because it's not. I say that in the start of the book. I'm like, these are not your best practices for Python. This is what we do to get things through. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, that's great. I love the so you're kind of like you're at the point where you kind of need some tricks up your sleeve, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it's
That's
your roll of duct tape.
yeah, that's fantastic. That is funny. I can think of all the Leanpub books I've read over time. That's a pretty unique approach. I mean, the kind of like tools in the tool belt, but specifically for the ones when you're under pressure, when you need a kind of shortcut or something like that, is a
Mm.
pretty unique idea. So perhaps not surprisingly, one of the things you talk about in the book is managing your workload when you're under pressure. So one way is having some tricks that you can get from this book, for example. But just in general, how would you, if someone were like, if you had someone new in their first job in your company working on your team, what advice would you give them about managing workload under the kind of pressures that you and your colleagues work under?
Yep, my advice there is always going to be to write it down and take a step back. So that's going to be in the book we will sort of go through some processes of how you can write down the um how you can track your day-to-day activities. So we're looking at the I've actually got this going back years. I did it I've done it here I'm at Floating Rock now, where I've got every day is just a rough list of what I intended to do and what got done, and that goes back, and it's just for me. It's just for me to go in. I can put any nonsense I want in there. But by writing it down, you get the ability to uh, move that information around. So I can say, "Hey, this is what I want to do today," and my boss can come in and say, "Oh, we've got to do this other thing." I'll look at the list and go, "Does it fit?" No. Okay, it's going on tomorrow. I'll put it on tomorrow's list, and you can start to shuffle these around rather than just as taking tickets, what you see in Jira, assigning them all, and then you've just got this massive unstructured list of work. The other aspect of it is, when I say taking a step back, is looking at the tasks that you're given and questioning them. When people give you a task, they are not always in the mindset of the studio at large. They're in mindset of, I have to get this done. Here's what I need to do my thing. That may not be what they're actually wanting. And if you build it exactly how they ask for it, they may realize that they communicated it wrong. So by taking a step back and just asking a whole lot of questions, you can start to dig down as to what was actually required to solve that problem, not not solving how they feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. To that often, like even if you're in a company, you can kind of sometimes relate to your colleagues as clients. And often, if you're doing work for a client, just doing what they tell you or what they think they want is definitely the wrong thing to do. And yes, and the best way around it is not to tell them they're wrong. That's not what you want. It's to ask them questions and get them around to sort of figuring it out along with you. Um, and yeah, another thing you write about is knowing your capacity.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that because well, I mean, I really like that your line. I'm looking at it right now. There's no such thing as giving it 110%. Of course, there isn't. I like that. But can you talk a little bit about capacity and how you think people should do that, managing workload? Because in the high intensity environment that you're talking about, where it can sometimes be up and it can sometimes be down, and it can sometimes be predictable and sometimes not. Managing your capacity in general is a tricky problem.
Yeah, I would say most of the developers and engineers I've met are horrible at estimating the amount of time it takes to do something. Um, Even when we do ask all these questions and we get it all mapped out first, it always takes longer than we expect. So when I say capacity, we need to look at our day to day and go, how much time do I have in my day to actually work? And if you're working an 8 hour day, you're not working 8 hours of that day. You've got lunch, you've got meetings, you've got whatever else, coffee breaks. Um, every change in your day can add about 20 minutes of brain fog as you're switching gears onto a different project. So if you're constantly switching projects as well, so if you work, let's say you're working on this project in the morning, and then someone comes in halfway through and just interrupts you and goes, "Oh, I need you to fix this now." Cool, you go fix it. Come back, even if it was a 5 minute task, maybe you've lost half an hour. And we need to account for these. We need to always dial back and say, you know what, we're mapping out our time to say, I'm going to spend 60% of my day is my capacity. And we say that it can be whatever works for you. It could be 60, it could be 80, never 100. You go, here's how much I can achieve. And I think it's going to take this much of my day, because it will always spoil over. Um, yeah, just try and dial it back. Otherwise, you will burn out, and no one really notices or appreciates if you're constantly, constantly pushing it. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah, I mean that's great advice, that you have to looking out for yourself is also a way of looking out for other people. I guess put the oxygen mask on yourself first, or what have you, might be an analogy for that. Another thing you write about in your book is imposter syndrome. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that very important topic for a bit.
Yeah, sure. So, um, I mean, everyone's got a different perspective on imposter syndrome. I don't have my book up, but I wrote in that it's, um, I like to think of it as comparing your secondary skill set to someone else's primary skill set. When we are working in teams, we all have various areas that we focus on, that we have interest in, and we become quite good at those little things. But maybe within those, there's something that we're not as good at because we haven't touched it that often, and someone else is better at it. And they come in and just do a really great job, and you suddenly think, oh, I don't actually know about as much about this as I thought. And yeah, it's where you start questioning yourself, because you think that you have to be as good as everyone else on your team at everything all the time. That's not what a team is. A team is an eclectic mix of people with different backgrounds, different skill sets, and the goal is not to have all those skill sets align exactly with each other. It's to mix them to cover a broad area, so that you've got experts in um, various fields. So, but yeah, it's something we all struggle with. I mean, with this book, I got very close to finishing it, and I almost deleted it. I was like, oh, why am I writing a book? Like, no one's gonna want to know all this stuff, because why? I'm not a pro with Python. I'm not a pro with any of these things. Why am I doing that? But actually, we're good enough. We're good.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, this is something that we just give as general advice, like when we're like doing tweets or blog posts about like, should I write a book? Yes, 100%. Something that you could write about at length, that there are people who know less about or understand less than you do. And in particular, I've often found that whether or not it sort of directly finds its way into the book, a person's own journey finds its way into the things that they write. Even computer programming books, believe it or not, for all the fiction lovers out there, the person's journey in life or through their career or through learning something is there. It's there in what they choose to talk about first, what they choose to talk about last, how they choose to talk about it, things like that. But whoever you are, that the fact that your journey is unique is enough in itself to make your expression of knowledge about something unique too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people and that's just something you sometimes just need to be told. I mean, it's not some compliment that you're special. It's just a fact.
Hmm.
You know.
I mean, I've worked. I mean, I've been doing this a while now, and there's constantly times when I will be very heavily corrected by a junior or an intern on something where they're like, "Oh, why don't we do it this way?" And I look at that and I go, "You know what? You're right. I've been doing this wrong for years, because
Yeah.
I just never read the documentation, and now I'm like, oh, okay, um, like yeah, it's
Yeah, definitely, it's true. Yeah, and the point being that wherever you are in your
Mm.
career as well, if you're writing a book like that, there is definitely something you can bring to it. Um, in the last part of this interview, what I like to do is talk to the guest about their experience writing and as an author. And so this was your first book, and you've talked a little bit about it already. But once you realized it was a book, like after 60 pages, say, and then getting feedback from other people, did you then set yourself a schedule? Did you tell like your family or something? Saturday afternoons I'm unavailable, or was it more kind of opportunistic than that?
No, I just continued on. So I mean, I've got two young children.
Ah,
So my day is very full from I work from home, and then after that it's your dinner, your bedtime, your bath time, all that. So I get a little bit of time in the evening. Once everyone's gone to bed, that I can use on the computer to do my own thing. Um, so yeah, no, I just kept.
yeah,
I think once I got to that 60 pages or so, that's when I shifted it from Microsoft Word to to writing it in Gitbook.
okay,
So it was in Markdown format and things, so it was a
okay,
bit more structured. Yeah,
okay. Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. So you started in Microsoft Word. That is where a lot of people start. And then you ended up in Gitbook. Okay, and then how did you write on Leanpub? Did you copy and paste from
yeah.
Git? Right. Okay.
So yeah, because I had it in Gitbook originally. I wrote a script because I didn't want they charged like $60 a month, I think, for their PDF exporter. So I wrote a PDF exporter to get the Markdown files out. Um, but yeah, then going on to Leanpub, once I figured out the way that they were structured, I just wrote a little Python script to package my files into the section chapters, because originally it was about 40 different Markdown scripts. Um, so I packaged them in, make sure they had the correct indentation. Um, and yeah, it was really just copying them in. So because the book was done at that point,
It was.
so I don't
Okay.
really,
Okay.
yeah, I didn't really do much in the way of writing on
Yeah.
Leanpub more than yeah.
Yeah, no, it's always. I mean, we love it when people just appear out of the blue with like 400-page books. It's just amazing, and then we also know how much work goes into that, and how much time it takes, and how much it means. And yes, a lot of people their approach to Leanpub is to just write somewhere else and then copy and paste into Leanpub, whatever that can mean in a couple of different things. But that is a pretty common approach, and it one great thing about it is allows you to use your own workflow and then just kind of integrate it with us. That can be a little bit more tricky if you're doing in progress publishing on Leanpub, or you're publishing different versions. Like I'm 10% done, publish a version. I'm 20% done, publish a version. But even in that case, the copy paste thing can work quite well. Um, Another interesting thing, one interesting thing about your workflow is it included drawing. You've got these drawings, and I saw something very funny on your LinkedIn that happened. I was wondering if we could talk about that, where basically you had a decision to make about AI, and
Yeah, I wanted I think I actually saw this maybe on your site saying that books with covers are more likely to sell than ones that don't have them. I was like, that's great, but I was because of the industry I'm in, generative AI is not very well regarded in visual effects, in terms of artists and technical artists, for good reason. It's a bit terrible in its generation, and it's already causing problems. So I was like, it's going to be disrespectful if I generate a cover. And to be honest, I don't really use generative AI anyway, so I don't have experience with it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to draw one. And I actually sat down with my 2-year-old and drew those little snakes that are on the cover in Inkscape. And yeah, so far, I'd say about 90% of the feedback on my book has been about my little drawings. Um, Most of it's positive, but I have received a number of quite spiteful messages calling out for using generative AI to make the images, which I found quite funny. Because yeah, I mean, it's not generative. Yeah,
yeah, no, I just found that funny. I mean, it is in the genre of someone being presumptuous about some unethical matter, actually making a kind of ethical mistake of their own, and that genre of story has its own enjoyments that comes with it. Actually, on that note, I normally don't like to jump back a bit, but actually, you do talk about AI in your book, and that is a very interesting
yes,
thing. So, one of the great things about my job is I get to talk to people from different industries and people who are on the cutting edge and stuff like that. So, um, I was wondering if you could just maybe take a few moments to talk a little bit more about the general opinion of generative AI in film and animation, because I mean, from the you know doom scroller or the bro scroller kind of world on X or whatever, you think that all the industries and all the gaming companies are going to be just like firing all the programmers and artists and doing generative AI, next week, basically. Uh,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot in that space. It's changing all the time, and there's um, so far not much useful is actually being created from the whole generative AI space. So I tend to ignore it because it's all, especially when you see the messages from just promoters or CEOs or things, you just ignore all of that because it's mostly false advertising anyway. But in my book particularly, we're not looking so much at generative AI. What we're looking at is AI, or specifically large language models, usage within a production environment. So that's looking at your working with locally installed, because a lot of the visual effects based systems are disconnected from the internet. So on there's something called TPN, or Trusted Partner Network, that requires you to lock your production networks out so that people don't leak information.
Right. Okay.
So they simply don't have access to those large language models. So
Okay.
there's the local aspect, and then there's also the ones of creating your own tools. So that's things like typing in, for Nuke, for example, which is a software for doing compositing, there might be 400 different types of nodes you can add to do your compositing. So instead of having to search for the exact name, we can make it where you type in you start typing, and it will guess. It will show you, hey, here, based on what nodes you've already created and the text you've got, you probably mean one of these. And artists will never think twice about that. If it pops up, they'll, yeah, that one. And they never think twice that AI was involved with that. It's just these little predictors, these little nudges that you can build into your systems to make the process smoother for your users. And that's the type of AI that I'm interested in, is less the big generative, the fancy stuff I couldn't care about, but making usability more streamlined. That's what that's about.
Speaking of making things easier for people, you gave me the perfect podcast guest segue into the very last question that I always like to ask on the podcast if the guest is a Leanpub author, which is, now I know you didn't do a lot of writing on Leanpub or anything like that, but if when you have been using Leanpub, setting up your book, hitting the publish button, things like that, if there was one thing that had you shaking your fists at us going, damn you, Leanpub, why is this so terrible? Or if there were one magical feature we could build for you, can you think of something that you would ask us to do?
I think I sent you guys a list when I first started.
Oh, we would have read it 100%.
But I mean, the two things I would change for that, one is uploading images. You have to do them one by one, and it's like 4 clicks per upload. And the other one would be this, just having the little JavaScript markdown preview, so that you can check that things are without, because otherwise you generate, you wait 10 minutes, and then you get an email saying, oh, it failed because the image isn't loaded. Oh, typo.
Yeah. So thanks very much for that feedback. The first one we've had a couple of times before, and it's probably so obvious people don't say it. The second one we've had quite a bit, where basically in Leanpub you write in plain text, and then that plain text has to get turned into a formatted ebook or print ready PDF. And so there's a difference between what you're actually, for anyone who doesn't know, there's a difference between what you're actually typing and seeing on the screen, and then what's actually going to be produced for people to read in the end. And authors who are accustomed to certain tools, or who just would like to be able to see at least some pre-version of what it's going to look like. And also then on top of that, sometimes Leanpub books fail to generate. This is less, partly because we try hard to ask this question, but they do sometimes fail partway. So you have to click a button to generate it, and then sometimes it'll even fail partway through. And then we do have a feature where we send you some information about maybe where the line broke or something like that. But that predicting those errors and informing you about what went wrong when those errors happen is one area where we know we need to improve hugely. So yeah. So
I was using VS Code to do it, because VS Code, you've got your markdown. It's not, it uses Markdown, not Makua, so you don't quite have the with your Makua spec, you can have 10 levels of headings, which is great. It's not part of Markdown, but I was using that to sort of make sure I had the syntax right. But then there were times when I was like, oh, I had Markdown supports images inside of tables, but Makua doesn't. So it would look fine, submit it, and then error, and so, oh, what does this error mean?
Yeah. Well, Brandy, for anyone who's made it this far too, it's worth going into the weeds a little bit. But sometimes, so when the Leanpub book is created, it's not generated exclusively from your manuscript, the things you've typed. There's other things that go in there too, like that your author name is drawn from elsewhere in your account. And on occasion, we get a version of someone has a funny like UTF character in their author name. And then that causes the book generation to break. And it's like, you can spend all this time tearing your hair out. What's in my book that's causing the problem? And it's not in the book at all. So for anyone listening, if you do end up with a preview generation, please email us at hello@leanpub.com about it. Even if we can't sort of solve it right away for you or something like that, we can give you guidance about like where to look and things like that, where things might go wrong. And if you search our help center, you'll find things too. But yeah, thanks very much for that feedback. Alex, and thank you very much for taking time to talk to me and to talk to all of us about your book, your very good book, Practical Python for Production Under Pressure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.